Okay, so yesterday we got towards the bottom of Ted Zion Mabed, or maybe even to the top of Yud Zion Amud Aleph, but it was a little confusing, and so Dove asked that I go over it. And so we'll begin at the two dots on Ted Zion Mabed. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. So uh, um, our Mishnah said that if the avoda of any of the korbanot is done by an onain, namely one whose relative died that day, the rabbis extended this concept to the day, to all the time until the burial of that relative. But if one's relative died on a particular day, so a Cohen's relative died on a particular day, then if he performed that avoda, the avoda on that any avoda on that day for a sacrifice, so that sacrifice would be invalid. So Rava attempts to qualify that statement. So let's see how Rava does that. So again, two dots on Tet Zion Mabet, owning puzzle. So that's exactly what the our Mishnah said, Amarava lo shanu ella b'korban yachid, aval b'korban tzibor miratza. That in fact, when we say that it's not going to be accepted, we're referring specifically to the invalidation of a korban yachid, an individual's sacrifice, not a communal sacrifice. But a communal sacrifice, actually, it would work and it would satisfy the requirements.
For the
Kal
Kohen
v'chomer,
Gadol or for all Kohanim? Because that's our
for all
discussion.
Kohanim, all Kohanim.
That's
This
the
is
confusion yesterday.
No, this is all Kohanim. The Kohen Gadol has no concept of owning whatsoever. There's no an owning doesn't apply to a Kohen Gadol at all. This is a regular Kohen. This is the regular Kohen that we're talking about.
But
So
earlier we did discuss it, though, that there was made a difference. That when earlier in the Gemara yesterday,
yes.
was
But the
Rav
Kohen
Yochanan
Gadol
said
has
that
no owning. Kohen Gadol has no owning.
no,
Kohen
but
Gadol service.
we made a distinction with Rav Yochanan earlier in the Gemara that there was a distinction. The Kohen that applied. Why was it accepted for Kohen Gadol? Because it wasn't a yachid. He was performing a tzibor, chatat tzibor, but not if it had been his own.
Not as an owning. That was about Tuma.
No, it was an onain. It was clear it was
Well,
about. It
a
wasn't
Kohen
tuma.
Gadol's sacrifices as an onain are valid no matter what. Doesn't make a difference whether it's yachid. Doesn't make a difference whether it's tzibor. So I'm not sure. Obviously I
No,
wasn't there, so I don't know
no, it's
exactly
back
what he
on.
said. But
It's
the
back on
Kohen
Rabbi
Gadol's
Yochanan.
what?
It was. It was a discussion Rabbi Yochanan. Not earlier that it was a distinction that. Well, how
I will
would
take a look and see if I can find that Rabbi Yochanan, not during the, after we finish, and I close the recording. But I do not believe that there is any opinion that says that Kohen Gadol's aninut somehow only applies in certain situations. The only situation that I'm aware of that we're more limited is in connection with Tuma, not in connection where we only apply it to a korban yachid, that's going to be a problem, and not a korban tzibor. But an onain, when it comes to an onain who's a Kohen Gadol, it's always going to be valid. It doesn't make a difference whether it's what kind of korban it is. All right,
well, I
so
don't know, but regarding Tuma, when we discussed this yesterday, it would apply to because if the whole entire kahal was mentalmid, then even the Kohen head yod could perform the avoda.
correct, exactly. That's
So,
what I'm saying. My point is that there is no way in which there's a distinction for an with respect to aninut, with respect to the nature of the korban. So again,
well, we'll look it up later.
I'll take a look and see if I can find that Rabbi Yochanan. If you want to spend time to find the Rabbi Yochanan, you can let me know. But let's finish this Gemara, because again, this Gemara is very complicated, and so I want to make sure that we don't lose the flow. And so as a result, let's go through this Gemara, and then again, at the end of the day, at the end of the when we finish today's daf, if you want to find that location, I can try and explain that other Gemara to you. But my understanding is that aninut applies to only to a Kohen Hedjot, not to a Kohen Gadol. A Kohen Gadol who's an onain, all of his sacrifices remain valid. Doesn't make a difference whether it's a personal sacrifice. Doesn't make a difference whether it's a communal sacrifice. And indeed, that's an important element in what we're going to see in the next couple of minutes, because the discussion is going to recognize the fact that when it says that aninut only applies to a Kohen Hedyon and does not apply to a Kohen Gadol, it's a general statement. And so as a result, we're going to be now focusing on general statements and the implication that they have, because the statement in connection with an onain by an ordinary Kohen, it's just a general statement that an onain by a Kohen is not, a regular Kohen is not allowed to offer the sacrifice, and that the sacrifice is invalid. It doesn't say what the nature of that korban is. And so it's Rava is saying that we're going to, even though the statement in the Torah is a general statement, and therefore I might have thought that that general statement should apply even to whether it's a korban yachid or a korban tzibor. Rava suggests that it's only going to apply to a korban yachid and not to a korban tzibor. And again, what is his kal v'chomer? He's going to use his kal v'chomer is going to be from Tuma. How does it work? Kal v'chomer mituma. Matuma. And again, now we are 2 lines below the 2 dots on Tet Zion and Bet. So kal v'chomer mituma. Matuma shalot hutra miklala etzel kohen gadol b'korban yachid. Now, again, and so when it comes to Tuma, there's no difference between a regular Kohen and a Kohen Gadol who performs an individual sacrifice, because the sacrifice is going to be invalid, right? It's going to be a problem. And Hutra Eitzel Hediot B'Karban Tzibor. And when it comes to the korban of the community, then even a regular Kohen's sacrifice is going to be valid. Okay, so that's the bottom line. So the point is that when it comes to the community, even a regular Kohen works, and even though when it comes to the Kohen Gadol, Tuma is clearly stricter than Aninut. But Aninut shehutr miklala etzel Kohen Gadol b'korban yachid. When it comes to Aninut, where even the Kohen Gadol can offer a sacrifice that's an individual sacrifice, Eino din shehutra etzel Kohen Hedyo b'karban tzibor. Well, then certainly the Kohen, an ordinary Kohen, should be able to offer a communal sacrifice, because again, he can offer a communal sacrifice with respect to Tuma, and Tuma is less strict than and Tuma is more strict, is more strict than Aninut. So if Tuma is more strict than Aninut, as we see from the first sentence, and when it comes to Aninut, a Kohen, and so as a result, when it comes to the ability of and when it comes to Tuma, a Kohen can and a regular Kohen can offer even a communal sacrifice. So when it comes to Aninut, which is less strict than Tuma, certainly an individual Kohen can offer a communal sacrifice. So that is the kal v'chomer. Maskifla Rava Bar Ilai. Rava Bar Ilai asks the following question. And in order to understand this question, we need to recognize that effectively there are 3 other statements. So we have there's the one statement with respect to aninut of a Kohen Gadol, that it doesn't apply at all. But there are 3 other, there are 3 other statements, or 3 statements that we have to recognize are presumptions that are in here. Okay, and that are going to fundamentally be questioned by Rav Ahilai by creating 3 other alternative kal v'chomers. Now let's take a look in Rashi. It's Rashi. It's basically 2 or 3 lines down from the opposite the 2 dots in the Gemara. Maskif la Rava bar Ahilai. The Rava bar Ahilai is essentially saying just the opposite. Parich, I'm going to ask you, the pshitale, because the tuma lo hutra l'kohen gadol b'karban yachid midelo ashkechan de ishtarai ela b'tzibor. That basically we've said that when it comes to a kohen gadol and a karban yachid, tuma doesn't. It doesn't enable you to bring a korban yachid. So that is because we say tuma is going to be a problem with respect to a korban yachid, and the only permission is in connection with a korban tzibor. All right, so that's concept number one. All right, so again, concept number one is that a Kohen Gadol's offering of an individual sacrifice would not overcome tuma. Again, because the Torah only references it being permitted for communal sacrifices. Point number one. Point number two. Upshitale, continuing in Rashi. Upshitale de hutra betzibor afilu etzel kohen hedjot mid ishtere stama. That when it comes to the permission of tuma with respect to a korban tzibor, then it's even permitted for a kohen hedjot. Because again, the Torah just has a plain leniency with respect to a korban tzibur, and so as a result, we again say that that's going to be okay. And so we're going to say that it even applies to a regular Kohen, not just to a Kohen Gadol. Upshitale, and point number three, the aninut hutral afilu bekorban yachid, that when it comes to an individual's korban with respect to aninut, that it's going to be permitted, Eitzel Kohen Gadol, Ashtre Stama, that because the Torah just says that Aninut does not apply to a Kohen Gadol, so as a result, we're going to say it doesn't apply to a Kohen Gadol in all situations, whether it's a Korban Yachid, or whether it's a Korban Sibor, or even a Korban Yachid. Ube Isser Aninut Eitzel Kohen Hedyo. So now, when it comes to this prohibition of Aninut with respect to an individual Kohen, Balachalik, you're trying to come, Rava, and trying to distinguish al yedei kal v'chomer, through a kal v'chomer, v'lomar lo nesar ela biyachid v'lo amrinan stama itzar, and you're going to say that it only applies to a korban yachid, and we're not going to apply, even though the Torah offers a general prohibition of aninut for a regular kohen, we're not going to apply that in all situations. We're going to only apply it to korban yachid and not to korban sibor. So im b'mashalo chelku hakasuvim, but when it comes to the fact that in connection with those three other situations, a Kohen Gadol's offering of an individual sacrifice that would not overcome Tuma, a regular Kohen's offering of a communal sacrifice that it's valid because the permission is made generally, and a Kohen Gadol's offering as an onain is valid even for an individual sacrifice. All three of those are based on stam psukim that don't try to distinguish. Atabalachalek al yedei kal v'chomer. You can make a similar kal v'chomer that undermines those three general statements. So on my pshitulach b'hanach, how come you can say it's this one that is so obvious to you? Dila'el yesh lecha lidrosh kal v'chomer chiluf lahachaliv es kulan. You can undo all three of these items. And now we're going to do it. We're going to actually undo all three of them. So our first one is going to contradict the third one, the most recent one that we just mentioned by Rashi. Rashi noted the fact that that based on the stam allowance, a Kohen Gadol's offering as an onain is valid even for an individual sacrifice. Now I'm going to show you how I can make a kal v'chomer that says, you know what? A Kohen Gadol's offering of an individual sacrifice is not going to be good even if he's an onain. Lo sutar aninot etzel Kohen Gadol bekorban yachid mekal v'chomer. I can give you a kal v'chomer using our other three elements to show you that a Kohen Gadol's individual sacrifice for an individual, is not going to be valid as a result of a kal v'chomer. Here's the kal v'chomer. Uma tuma. When it comes to Tuma, Shehutra Eitzel Kohen Hedyot B'tzibor, where it is, when it comes to Tuma, that we say a regular Kohen is permitted to bring a communal offering in connection with Tuma, Lo Hutra Eitzel Kohen Gadol B'Korban Yachid. But it wasn't permitted with respect to a Kohen Gadol for an individual. So again, we aninut Shalo hitra etzel Kohen hedyo korban sibor. So now I can show you aninut is actually stricter than tuma. You were saying before, your whole kal v'chomer before was based on the fact that aninut was more lenient than tuma. Now I'm going to show you that it's stricter than tuma, because again, when it comes to a public korban, Tuma is less strict than Aninut. So Aninut, Shalo Hutra Eitzel Kohen Hedyo Bekarban Sibor, that when it comes to a communal offering where aninut is not permitted for a regular kohen, even for a public for a communal sacrifice. Eino din shelo sutar etzel kohen gadol bekarban yachid. Well, then certainly for a korban yachid of a even if the kohen gadol is the onain, we should not allow it. So again, the point is that you can go in each direction with these four statements, that we have four different statements and we can use them to go in different directions. And so as a result, I could argue that in fact, as we just saw, aninut of a Kohen Gadol doesn't apply to an individual sacrifice. Or, you know what? Here's a contradiction of Rashi's first item in his list. Again, the first item in Rashi's list is that a Kohen Gadol's offering of an individual sacrifice would not overcome Tuma. But you know what? Maybe Tuma of a Kohen Gadol's offering of an individual sacrifice also should be valid. V'tutar Tuma Eitzel Kohen Gadol b'karban yachid mikal v'chomer. We can use a kal v'chomer of the other three elements to try and show you that, in fact, you could allow Tuma with respect to a private sacrifice. How? Uma aninut shelo hutar etzel kohen hedyo bekarban sibor. When it comes to aninut, we do not allow a regular kohen to offer a sacrifice because he's an onain. And so even a communal sacrifice is not going to be valid. And yet, Hutra Eitzel Kohen Gadol B'Karban Yachid, and yet we exempt a korban and a personal korban of a Kohen Gadol when it comes to his aninut. So as a result, we see that a Kohen Gadol is particularly lenient. So Tuma, Shehutra, Eitzel Kohen Hedyo, B'Karban Sibor. When it comes to Tuma, that is allowed by for a regular Kohen with respect to a public sacrifice, or a communal sacrifice. Eino din shehutra etzel Kohen Gadol b'karban yachid. So certainly it should be permitted for a Kohen Gadol with respect to an individual. So again, the point is that we see that Tuma on some.
Tuma, that last point was Kohen Gadol Tuma, or
Correct, Tuma. Tuma. The point is that we see that Tuma is more lenient than Aninut. And so because Tuma is more lenient than Aninut, we should allow, and when it comes to Aninut, a Kohen Gadol is able to offer an individual sacrifice. So he certainly should be able to offer an individual sacrifice in the case of Tuma. And yet we know that again, the point of all of this is to show these different contradictions, because the presumption is, and we know that the halacha is that that's not true. And so again, that your Kal V'chomer Rava doesn't work, Rava Bar Eli is pointing out. And now contradiction number of the second point in Rashi. Again, Rashi's second point was that a regular Kohen's offering of a communal sacrifice would be valid because the permission for it is made generally. But now we're going to show that a Kal V'chomer can contradict this. V'lo sutar tuma etzel Kohen hedyo b'karban sibor mikal v'chomer. And you know what? We could say that you should not allow an individual Kohen, not a Kohen Gadol, a regular Kohen that should not be allowed to use Tuma to overcome with respect to a communal sacrifice. Why? Uma aninut shehutra etzel Kohen Gadol b'karban yachid. When it comes to aninut, which is going to be less strict because a Kohen Gadol is allowed to offer private sacrifices, lo hutra etzel Kohen hedyo b'karban sibor, and yet even in that less strict situation of aninut, an individual Kohen's not allowed to offer a communal sacrifice while he's an onain. When it comes to Tuma shalo hutra etzel Kohen Gadol b'karban yachid. A Tuma is stricter than aninut, and so as a result, because after all, a Kohen Gadol's not allowed to offer an individual's sacrifice. Eino din shelo tutar b'kohen hedyo b'karban sibor. Well, then certainly you should not allow a regular Kohen to offer even a communal sacrifice. After all, Tuma is stricter than aninut. In aninut, an individual Kohen, a regular Kohen's not allowed to offer a communal sacrifice, so too, with respect to Tuma, he should not be allowed to offer a communal sacrifice. So
We
the
just said
point
you
is,
can. You just said the Kohen Gadol can offer
no,
betuma.
we're talking about an individual Kohen, a regular Kohen, not a Kohen Gadol. The point is that a regular Kohen should not be able to do it, right? A Kohen Gadol is not able to offer a private sacrifice in the case of Tuma. So we see that that's stricter for the Kohen Gadol than it is in the case of Aninut, because in Aninut, he can even offer a private sacrifice. And so when it comes to a regular Kohen who's not allowed to offer a communal sacrifice in Aninut, if a Tuma is stricter than Aninut, then we should say that similarly, Tuma should be stricter for even an individual Kohen. And so as a result, just as an individual Kohen can't offer a communal sacrifice in the case of Aninut, he also can't offer a communal sacrifice in the case of Tuma. So we've undone all of these other general statements. And so the point is that Rav Bar Ilai is making is that we can the presumptions that underlied Rava's original statement, we can undo each of them by using the other statements. And so none of them should be able to stand. And now the Gemara in the parenthetical offers a siman, velo sutar, aninut, tuma, yachid, sibur, siman. The way you can remember all of this, I'm not exactly sure exactly how it all works, but the bottom line is that that's a siman for what we just went through of these different kavachomers. So
I just will say that when you're using individual, there are two senses of that.
Yes,
It
yes,
would have
I
been
really
simpler
mean
to say regular Cohen rather because when we're thinking about an
on the
individual
screen,
sacrifice.
I was much more careful. On the screen, I was much more careful. On the screen, it says an ordinary Kohen. But yes, you're absolutely right. I said individual sometimes when I'm referring to Kohen, and if I said it with respect to Kohen, I'm referring to an ordinary Kohen. But I should only use it with respect to the sacrifice. I just
Yeah, it was getting
get
confusing
myself caught.
there.
Yeah, so my apologies. Again, it's right on the screen. So again, so let's go. We'll go over the third one again. The point is that we can say that when it comes to Tuma, maybe even an individual Kohen shouldn't be able to offer a communal sacrifice.
The regular
because
Kohen.
Aninut is
A regular Cohen shouldn't be able to offer it. Ordinary
what
Cohen.
did I say individual again?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. An ordinary Kohen should not be able to offer a communal sacrifice in the case of Tuma, because Tuma is stricter than Aninut. Because when it comes to a Kohen Gadol can offer a private sacrifice as an onen. But of course, and a regular Kohen can't even offer a communal sacrifice when it comes to Aninut. A regular Kohen, yes. So when it comes to Tuma, which is stricter, because when it comes to a Kohen Gadol, he's not able to offer a private sacrifice in a case of Tuma. So then when it comes to Tuma, which is stricter than Aninut, and in connection with Aninut, a regular Kohen is unable to offer a communal sacrifice, so too, when it comes to Tuma, a regular Kohen should not be able to offer a communal sacrifice. And so as a result, we ended up undoing all of these. And so instead, we say, you can ask it in every which way. Take a beduchte. And so as a result, we need to leave all of them in their place. What does it mean to leave all in their place? So Rashi explains, the top Rashi on Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, Yesh Ladun. So we can actually conclude, V'yesh lahachlif, meaning that you can make these logics. You do these kal v'chomers. V'yesh lahachlif, and you could switch everything around as we've just done. We've shown that every statement can be undone. V'lo noda, and so as a result, we don't know nidrosh, which of these kal v'chomers to learn. Hilka kochada teku beduchta. As a result, leave all of them where they were in the original statement. Meaning, kiksiv vata. stam, as they are written stam in the Torah. Kishahutra aninut lekohen gadol stam. So when the aninut for a kohen, so we're going to have four different statements when it comes to the kohen gadol's aninut, where it says stam. It means ben b'yachid ben b'tzibor hutra. It doesn't make a difference whether it's a korban tzibor or a korban yachid. It's going to be permitted for a kohen gadol. And the kishin nasra lahedjot. And when we say that a regular Kohen, it's going to be prohibited for him when he's an onain, Bain b'yachid, bain b'tzibur nasra. Doesn't make a difference whether it's a korban yachid or a korban tzibur. And keshehutra tuma b'tzibur, and when we say that tuma is allowed for a communal offering, hutra afla kohen edjot, it was permitted generally, even for a regular kohen. Ukisha Nezra, b'karban yachid, and when it was prohibited, when a tuma was prohibited for an individual's korban, Nezra afla kohen gadol. It was prohibited even for a kohen gadol. So all the statements now become general statements. We apply them in all situations, and therefore that's how we end up learning it. And so we reject Rava's proposal, and now we are ready to move on. Okay, so again, very complicated. Again, you can go over the recording, especially with the while looking at the screen, because again, each of the Kal V'chomers are explained there, and hopefully that will be helpful. So Tvul Yom, the next item in our Mishnah was a Tvul Yom. A Tvul Yom is somebody who went to the mikvah, but night has not come. So they had a nocturnal emission. They touched a creepy crawly thing and became tameh. And now they go to the mikvah during the daytime, and then they are not fully tahor until night falls. That's why women go to the mikvah at night so that they're immediately tahor. But the bottom line is that today, but in historical times, men went to the mikvah and they became tahor that night. So what's the story with respect? Nolan, how do we know that in fact that they're going to be, that a Tvul Yom who offers a sacrifice is going to be an invalid sacrifice? Titania, Rabbi Simai Omer, Rabbi Simai says, Remez l'Tvul Yom she'im avar chilul minayin. How do I know that? So we're going to cite a brisa, and the brisa, Rabbi Simai says in the brisa, Talmud Lomar Kedoshim Yeyu Lo Yechalalu. This pasuk in Vayikra Perakav Aleph pasuk Vav begins Kedoshim Yeyu, you should be holy. Lelo Kehem V'Lo Yechalalu, and then it says don't profane. So what's the connection between holiness and profanity? Namely, I might have thought it referred to the tuma, because that's a logical discussion. We already know that there's a separate pasuk that we learn from, they shall separate, which is the pasuk that we saw before, Parak Kaf Bet, pasuk Bet, in Vayikra. So we don't need it to tell us about Tuma itself. Teneo Inyan L'Tvul Yom. So the next thing that is next to a Tameh is somebody who was Tameh and he went to the mikvah and is now becoming Tahor. And they're a Tvul Yom. They're still a little bit Tameh because night hasn't fallen, but they've done whatever they need to do in order to become Tahor. And so the Brisa says that that's the basis. But one second, Ema Tanehu Inyan L'Koreach Karcha L'Ulamashkus Pa'asakan. But one second, maybe we should, instead of looking at the general topic of that verse, we should look back to the prior verse, which says that a Kohen's not allowed to make a bald spot or destroy his beard in connection with a loss in his family. And so as a result, doesn't that show that, maybe we should say that it applies there? So no, Tvul Yom De'im Avad B'misa Minalan. Well, one second. How do I know that if a Tvul Yom does an avoda, that he's going to be subject to the death penalty by the hands of heaven? To Gamar Chilu Chilu Mitruma. Well, there is a Gzeira Shava using the word Chilul from Truma. And that Chilul is the V'lo Yechalalu of our pasuk. de pasel betruma machil avoda. That we learn from that gzeira shava that just that one who's ineligible to eat truma is going to cause the avoda to be undone. The lo pasel betruma lo machil avoda, and so and one who's not ineligible to eat truma does not invalidate the avoda. That gzeira shava effectively tells us that it can't be a bald spot or destroying your beard that is causing, that is what we're talking about when we say kedoshim yayu v'lo yechalalu, because those things, if you were to do those things, it would not make you ineligible to eat truma. And so as a result, we can't say that it's referring to that. And so as a result, since we can't say that it's referring to somebody who makes a bald spot or destroys their beard, we can thereby say that it's applying to the next logical case of tuma, which is the case of a tvul yom. So although we have not yet provided a source for a mechusar kippurim, which feels very appropriate to use that term on Erev Yom Kippur, so is somebody who lacks atonement because although they've gone to the mikveh and night has fallen, so they've done everything with respect to their physical body, but they still haven't offered a sacrifice that's required. So, for example, a metzora that heals. So he not in addition to going through a process, a physical process, he will need to offer a sacrifice after that process is done. And so after that
Nazir, doesn't a Nazir have to offer
a Nazir also. I'm not saying didn't mean to imply that Mitzvah was the only one. So a Nazir as well, you would need to do that. And so as a result, if they have not yet offered the korban, even though they've already done all of the mikvah work and the night has already fallen, on some level they're even more or less tameh than a tvul yom. So now, even though we have not yet brought a source for that, we're going to bring a source for that, I believe, on Friday. But the point is, and we're going to effectively skip over for the time being. But the point is that the Gemara is now asking a question: why not? What we have learned is we have learned Tuma and we've learned Tvul Yom. So the question is why can't we use Tuma and Tvul Yom to teach about Mechusar Kippurim? So that's going to be the fundamental question. But to get there, we are going to first ask Amarabba, Lama li dekasav Rachmana Tameh Utvul Yom u'Mechusar Kippurim. Why did the Torah teach all three of them? Tzriche. It's because each of them are needed. Okay, and so now the Gemara goes through to show that in fact they're all needed. And we're going to initially say they're all needed on an individual level. Dikasav Rachmana Tam, that you couldn't learn all the other two from any one of them. Because because if the Torah had only told us about Tuma, Shekain Mitame. Well, Tuma is something that is so severe that if somebody who's Tame touches something, it makes that other thing Tame also. So, of course, it's going to be so strong as to cause the invalidity of an avoda. But when it comes to the other things, which don't have that strength, maybe they would not invalidate a korban. So as a result, we can't just have tameh. B'tvul yom. What if we just had tvul yom? Mechusar kippurim lo asimine shekain pasel b'truma. Well, you wouldn't be able to derive mechusar kippurim from it because mechusar kippurim, because a tvul yom is not allowed to eat truma. But a mechusar kippurim is allowed to eat truma. So a Kohen who is a metzora and then became tameh as a result of being a metzora, and then he heals, and now he's gone to the mikveh, and the night has fallen. That night he's able to eat truma, even though he still hasn't finished his tahara process because he hasn't brought a korban, but he's considered tahor. So b'mechusar kippurim. So now, all right, so fine. So just have it teach us mechusar kippurim, and we'll figure out the other two. Well, tvul yom lo asamine shekain mechusar ma'isa. But a tvul yom is a little bit different And so as a result, a mechusar kippurim, you have to do an action. And so as a result, maybe because you have to do an action, it's considered more severe than a tvul yom. A tvul yom, all you have to do is wait. And so as a result, maybe we would say that a tvul yom is not able to be derived from Mechusar Kippurim because Mechusar Kippurim also requires an action, and so maybe only when you have to still do an action would we say that you're not allowed to do the services of a sacrifice. But when it comes to Tvul Yom, where all you have to do is wait until nightfall, it's going to happen by itself. So as a result, maybe you would be allowed to offer a sacrifice. So therefore, Michad lo asi, it's clear that we're not able to derive it from one. Well, Tezi Chad mitarti. Well, let's learn one of them from the other two. So baha lo klichtov v'rachmana. So which behe lo klichtov v'rachmana. So in which one should we not write? It should not be written in the Torah. So now I will note here that I've been thinking about this because we never ask in what's going to come up. Well, why don't we just not write Tameh and just write Tvul Yom and Mechusar Kippurim? And the bottom line is that the reason that that's not going to work is because the way we learn Tvul Yom is based on an Im'eno Inyan. But if we didn't have the case of Tameh, we wouldn't have an Im'eno Inyan, and so we wouldn't be able to know Tvul Yom. So the only way the Torah is teaching us Tvul Yom is based on an Im'eno Inyan because we already learned Tameh. So right now, as the Torah is written, there is no way that you could only have Tvul Yom and not have Tameh. So I just wanted to note that fact. So
what is the Inyan here?
The Imeno Inyan Latuma, right? That was the Imeno Inyan that we learned. Tvul Yom was from the pasuk Kedoshim Yayu V'lo Yichalalo. That based on that pasuk, which you might have thought referred to Tuma, but we already know Tuma from V'yanazru, and so as a result, we're going to use it in Imeno Inyan Latuma, so we'll use it for Tvul Yom. So the point is that you can't have a pasuk. We don't have a pasuk in the Torah that only teaches Tvul Yom without also teaching Tuma. Okay, so lo lichtov. So first we're going to try is lo lichtov mechusar kippurim. So let's not write mechusar kippurim. V'tesi mahanach, and we'll learn it out from the other two. Malahanach shekem psulim b'truma. But 1 second, you can't learn out the mechusar kippurim from the other two because when it comes to mechusar kippurim, you're able to eat truma, but the other two you can't eat truma, and so as a result, you won't know that a person who's just because we know that two different people who cannot eat truma are not allowed to offer a sacrifice, it doesn't mean that somebody who's able to eat truma would also not be able to offer a sacrifice. So el lo lichtav rachmana b'tvul yom. All right, so fine. Have the Torah just teach us tuma and mechusar kippurim, and we'll omit tvul yom. V'tezi minhanach, and we'll learn it from the other two. So demai parachta. It's because after all, we earlier raised an objection. Malahana shekem mechusur masa. When it comes to mechusar kippurim and a regular case of tameh, there's some action that's required, whereas a tvul yom requires no action. But so kalisha la tumasan. But at the end of the day, the tuma is weaker when it comes to a mechusar kippurim than somebody who's a tvul yom, because after all, a tvul yom's not allowed to eat truma, whereas a mechusar kippurim is able to eat truma. So the Gemara answers, no, actually, you're not quite right. There is a case where, or there's an opinion where maybe mechusar kippurim is considered more tameh than a tvul yom. The kasavar, because maybe Rabba would say, as we say, kasavar, that he's of the opinion. Who's of the opinion? So Rashi helps us out. Rabba, the darsha lahai shmaisa lamemer dekul tzrichi. That Rabba, the one who's saying that all three of these were actually necessary, he must think that mechusar kippurim dizav, back into the Gemara again, we're at the top line of Yud Zayin Amabet, mechusar kippurim dizav kizav dami, that somebody who lacks atonement after being a zav. So again, the process of a zav is they've had some kind of emission that's not a seminal emission, and it's a man that we're talking about. It's a zav, not a zava. So and that person, and because we're talking about kohanim bringing sacrifice, doing the service in the base of Migdash, so that's why we're focusing on men. So the point is that this Kohen who is a zav, and he now stopped his emissions, and so as a result, it's no he has a he now goes to the mikvah, and now the next day he has to bring a sacrifice. So he's mechusar kippurim because he hasn't brought the sacrifice, but one might have thought that he's fully tahor. So again, this is a third case. We've been focused on the Mitzorah and the Nazir case, but there's a third case where you could be mechusar kippurim, and that's a zav. And I purposely didn't mention it because I knew the Gemara was going to come to it. And so the point is when it comes to a zav, actually, Rabbah is of the opinion that even somebody who's gone to the mikvah and night has fallen, but if they're a mechusar kippurim for a zav, they are not fully tahor. They are not considered tahor, and so as a result, that's why we're going to say that you can't learn Tvul Yom from mechusar kippurim and Tameh, because Mechusar Kippurim could be in some ways stricter than a Tvul Yom. And because it's stricter than a Tvul Yom, so as a result, both Tameh and Mechusar Kippurim are stricter than a Tvul Yom. So you can't learn from the two of them to the other, because maybe just because those other ones, a Kohen is not allowed to offer a sacrifice, doesn't tell you that a Tvul Yom also would not be able to offer a sacrifice. So that's why Rabbah said that you need psukim by all three, by Tameh, by Tvul Yom, and by Mechusar Kippurim.
He's not allowed to offer what sacrifice? The daily sacrifice, but he has to offer the sacrifice of for the Kippurim, right?
Yeah, well, he's mechusar.
He's a chayav.
No. He's chayav in the sacrifice, but he's not allowed to do the slaughtering of that animal.
Yeah,
He's not allowed
avodah,
to do
the other
singing
sacrifices, but he
right.
has to.
He can't. No, but he can't do the avodah of that sacrifice either. He can't do the avodah of the sacrifice that he's obligated to bring. He needs some other Kohen to do the avodah of that sacrifice.
But it's his sacrifice. He has to bring the sacrifice, doesn't he?
Yes, of course he has to bring the sacrifice. But when you bring a sacrifice, it doesn't mean that you do any of the avodah. And a mechusar kippurim, a regular Kohen who brings an olah, of course he can do all the avodah of that olah. If a Kohen who brings a shlamim can do the avodah associated with that shlamim, at least as far as I know. But when it comes to somebody who's mechusar kippurim, yes, he's obligated to bring the sacrifice, but he can't do the avodah for that sacrifice because he's still mechusar kippurim until the sacrifice is done.
Okay.
Okay, so having referenced mechusar kippurim as a zav, that it's like a zav, maybe we could say that this is a machlokas tanaim. Now, on some level, this is a question on Rabbah because is Rabbah paskening this halacha? And so as a result, we're going to try and say that no, Rabbah doesn't have to be paskening this halacha, that we could say that everybody is in agreement about this concept. But mechusar kippurim tizav kizav dami tanaihi. Maybe we should say that this concept that a mechusar kippurim is like of a zav is considered like a zav, that that's a machlokas tanaim detanya, because we have the following brisa: surafa onein umechusar kippurim. If somebody who is either an onein or mechusar kippurim burns, and we're talking about Rashi tells us the second of the narrow lines, the para aduma kai. We're talking about a para aduma, and so as a result, that's the situation that's the situation in our that this brisa is talking about. So and so what's the story? So kasher kshera, that's according to the Tanakama, it's kosher. Yosef Hababli Omer, Yosef Hababli says onen kshera. Yes, you're absolutely right with respect to an onen. But mechusar kippurim psula. But when it comes to somebody who lacks atonement, that they're not, it's not going to be valid. So my lav ba'akamivligi. Isn't this exactly what they're arguing about? Mar Savar, when it comes to Yosef Babli, he thinks mechusar kippurim dezav kazav dami, that he's like a zav, and therefore he's considered tameh, and therefore he's not allowed to offer the korban. Umar Savar lav kazav dami, and the other one says no. He's not like a Zav, and therefore he is able to offer, he is able to burn the para aduma. So isn't this exactly the machlokas regarding the point that Mechusar Kippurim dezav kazav dami? Aren't they arguing about exactly that? No, not necessarily. Lo, Dekuli Alma Kazavdami. Really, everybody agrees that they're like a Zav. It's meaning that everybody agrees that they're like they are consistent with Rabba's opinion, because that's what we want. We want everybody to be consistent with Rabba's opinion, so he's not paskening effectively this shaila of the machlokas. And here's what they're arguing about. So now, how can we, if in fact the Mechusar Kippurim is of a Zav, is like a Zav, well then how is it possible for the Tanakama to say that it's valid? Now, after all, he's like a Zav. So, Diksiv v'hiza hator. Well, the pasuk says, this is a pasuk in Bamidbar Perek Yutet, pasuk Yutet. Excuse me. Miklal shehu tamei. What's the implication of v'hiza tahor? Well, it's important to know that v'hiza tahor follows another pasuk. And that previous pasuk also says, "V'lakach ezov v'taval b'mayim ish tahor v'hiza." So the point is that we learned in the last pasuk that a tahor person is the one who's going to dip something in the water and do the sprinkling. And so why did you repeat that the person who's doing the sprinkling is tahor? So miklal shehu tameh. So the implication is he's not that tahor. That the fact that you need to repeat it is telling us that he's not fully tahor. So what is that telling us? Limeid al tvul yom shekasher b'para. That when it comes to a tvul yom, he's able to do the burning of the para aduma. So he is eligible, even though he's not yet fully tahor. He's able to do it. So now that we have that drasha, we can understand what it is that the Tanakama and Rav Yosef Habavli are arguing about.
No, can he bring a korban? Can he?
What?
So if he's
We're
not,
talking about burning a paraduma, not a korban.
but
Right? A Tvul Yom cannot bring a korban. He can't do any services of the
Right.
sacrifices of a korban. We know that for sure. We're saying that paraduma is more lenient than a traditional sacrifice, in that a Tvul Yom is able to do the sprinkling and presumably the burning of the paraduma, but although it didn't actually touch on that, and the question is what's the story with the Mechusar Kippurim?
But isn't that the paraduma? Aren't they performing? Aren't they makriv the paraduma?
No, the paraduma is not burned in the Beis Hamikdash at all. It's
But
burned
don't they
outside the
shecht
Beis
it?
Hamikdash.
Don't they shecht it?
They may shecht it in the Beis Hamikdash, but they definitely don't bring any of it as a sacrifice. So as a result, none of it
isn't that part of the sacrifice?
Yes, it for sacrifices. Slaughtering is part of the process, but it's not part of the process for something that's not a sacrifice, and a paraduma is not a sacrifice. That's why a zar. There are some people who say that why can a zar do the slaughter of a sacrifice? It's because the sacrificial act is not, by definition, sacrificial, because you do the same slaughtering for a regular animal. Indeed, that is why there is one kind of slaughtering of an animal that a zar can't do. I'm fairly certain that a zar is not allowed to do malika, because malika is only kosher. It's where you use the nail of the kohen in
Right.
order to break the neck of the
Bird
sacrifice
of the
from
bird.
the bird from the behind. It's not in the front, and so as a result, that is only permitted for a bird sacrifice, and so as a result, a czar is not able to do it because it's definitely a sacrifice. So the point is that again we're talking about paraduma. So what's the debate between the
So they don't
Tanakhama?
sacrifice it. They do shecht it, but they don't
Correct,
complete the
correct. They do
process.
sacrifice it, but even that is not considered a sacrificial act. And so as a result, you can allow people who might not have been able to participate otherwise to participate. Marsavar, so the Tanakhama says, Tuma de Torah Kula. When we're talking about Tuma in the Parsha of the Paraduma, and we say that this person can be a little tame when he's doing the sprinkling and he's burning the para, that it's because we're talking about all tumas of the Torah, and therefore even a mechusar kippurim who is considered like a zav is still in the process of becoming tahor, and so therefore we will allow even that person to bring to burn the para and to do the sprinkling.
He is
Umar
burning it
Savar,
though.
what?
He is burning it. I mean, he's burning it.
No,
He's
that's the
cooking it.
machlokas. This is machlokas between the Tanakhama and Yosef Bavli.
But
Tanakhama says that it's kosher if a mechusar kippurim burns it, and Rav Yosef Bavli says that it's invalid if a mechusar kippurim burns it.
no, I understand that. But the paraduma, there is shchita, there is hazaa sprinkling, right? There
Yes, the
is.
question is whether it's kosher or not.
I
That's what
understand.
we're talking about.
The other question I have is why is it not considered a korban if we're doing most things that like we would do with a korban?
Yeah, I mean, we have to put that to the side. It is definitely not a korban. It is not a sacrifice. It's not burned on the altar. There's no catching of the blood. There's no bringing of the blood to the altar. There's
But it's
none of the
sprinkling.
other three elements of what a sacrifice
But,
is.
but we learned earlier that a few points we reviewed this and reiterated that all of these other three things are what the integral part of the whole process is the sprinkling of the blood. That you can have
Yeah.
different kavanot and so forth, but the final act, one has to be considered a korban, has to sprinkle the blood, right?
Yes,
So in this
and there is
case, with the paraduma, we are sprinkling the blood. We're not doing
no,
korban.
no, no. We're sprinkling the water mixed with the ashes on the person who's tame.
Oh,
There's no
okay.
sprinkling of blood.
There is okay. I thought there was
No, no, no. There's no sprinkling of blood. No, no, no. The sprinkling, I apologize if that was not clear. The sprinkling that we're talking about is the sprinkling associated with the paraduma, which is the sprinkling of the water mixed with the
Oh,
ashes, mixed with the other things that are
okay.
that are
That's
included
correct.
in
But
it.
when you
Yeah.
said sprinkling, I was thinking of
No,
the
no, no,
blood.
no, 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 no. Okay. So Mar Savar. So again, the Tanakhama says, why is it that even a Mechosar Kippurim is allowed to do it? Because the Tuma de Kol Torah Kula. When we reference Tuma and saying that the person can be a little Tameh, it makes me think of
A
all
little
right, anyway.
pregnant. A
A
little
little
pregnant.
break, exactly. A lot of other things also. So, anyway, the point is that Princess Bride is only a little dead. So the point is Umar Sabar Tuma Dahach. So as a result, the point is you can be a little tame, and it means any kind of tuma. So you could be a little tuma zav there because mostly he's kosher for he's purified from tuma zav. It's just mechusar kippurim. But Umar Sabar no tuma dahach parsha. What kind of tuma are we talking about? Meaning, what kind of tuma is the tuma that is cured by paraduma? Well, we all know it's tumas mace. And so as a result, only when it comes to tumas mace are we going to hilkach onein utvul yom de tmei sharetz dekili. And sure, if it's more a lenient situation than tumas mace, like a tvul yom who is tummy with a bug, which is more lenient than than tumas mace, sure that'll work. But asu b'kal mitvul yom de mace. Well, that we can learn from the tvul yom of a mace to a tvul yom of other things. But ava mechusar kippurim tizav techamir. But when it comes to a mechusar kippurim of a zav, where you have to bring a korban, shekain tuma yotze alav migufa, and the tuma that he has came out of his own body. Low. So maybe in that situation, that's the situation where Rav Yosef Bavli says, no, you can't do it. And so at the end of the day, we're going to say that we're not going to allow this person who's Mechuser Kippurim to offer to burn the carbon pesach or to do any of the sprinkling on the person who is tameh, who we're trying to make tahor, tumas meis, who is trying to make tahor. So in all those situations, we're going to say that they're not, the person is, that the para aduma is now going to be invalid, and you're going to have to find a new red heifer. Well, boy, that's going to be an expensive mistake. So the bottom line is that Rabbah has now shown us that the Torah, in fact, did need to write each of Tameh, Tvul Yom, and Mechuser Kippurim. So, although again the next item in our Mishnah is Mechuser Kippurim, we're going to actually deal with that on Yud Tet Amabet. So we're going to turn to the item listed after that, which is Mechuser Begadim. And so, for that discussion of Mechuser Begadim, and we're going to seek the source for that. But for that discussion, stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Note, tomorrow is Yom Kippur, so tonight begins Yom Kippur. Tomorrow we will be learning after Yom Kippur on Zoom only at 8:30 p.m. I hope that you will be able to join us. Looking forward to continuing our learning together, and I wish you all a Gemar Chasima Tova.